All right, thank you very much. As you just heard, my name's Jack Blanchard. I'm the author and the managing editor of our morning Playbook newsletter, which hopefully you will start your day with. And I am very happy, delighted to be joined by Secretary Jennifer Granholm, as you already know, served as the Secretary of Energy under Joe Biden for 4 years, now brings her expertise to the DGA group as a senior counsellor, and to us all here today. Welcome, Secretary.
Thanks so much. Great to be on, Jack.
Thank you for coming. Of course, I want to talk about the bill going through Congress at the moment. Let's just talk first a little bit about your time in government now, because energy policy was obviously so central to what the Biden administration was trying to do. You got your own big, beautiful bill passed through Congress, if I can put it that way. But somehow when we got to the next election, it wasn't seen as a key campaign point for Joe Biden and subsequently Kamala Harris. When you look back at it, do you feel like you didn't quite get the credit you should have done for what you did?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, no doubt. The two bills, really, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, they spurred so much activity in building out our energy. But here's the challenge, is that, by the end of, December of 2024, we counted at DOE 950 announcements of factories that were coming to America or expanding in America. So for everybody who cares about reshoring, et cetera, bing, 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 it was happening. However, a lot of those were either announcements or maybe groundbreakings, but not so much yet ribbon cuttings. So contracts were being let, but so the point is that people on the ground, in spotty areas were feeling it because they were being hired, but in a lot of places that hadn't begun yet. And so I'm a former governor of Michigan too. And in Michigan, the loss of manufacturing jobs and the offshoring of manufacturing jobs is so huge. So the notion of being part of an effort to reshore and bring all this back, and just in the energy column alone, and since there are 195 countries who have signed on to the Paris Agreement, that means there's demand in the world for these products, for this technology, this equipment. And the question is, who was going to be building it? And we had been on this path to be the place where that was happening. And so I was really proud of that, but I wish we had been able to get it passed in the first year, so that you would be able to see the ramifications much more clearly on the ground.
Is there a political lesson, though, to learn there? Because you have to work, obviously, within the realities of politics. The Democrats lost the next election, as we all know. Is there something you could have done?
Well, I think this administration has shown that if you approach things with singular purpose, you can move more rapidly, especially if you have control of both chambers. But the bottom line is, moving more rapidly would have been preferable. We, of course, were at the whims of what was happening in Congress also. But that would, I think for every next president coming up, and, everybody wants to move fast, it's not even a question. But in terms of these kinds of projects that have long lead times, getting it done early so that you can actually see the benefit on the ground, I think is an important lesson.
Do you think, as you look now at the bill that is going through Congress, are there any positives you can take from what you see? Can you say something that you're pleased about?
Here's what I would say. I am positive and excited about what I heard from Senator Curtis, that there is some potential for amelioration. I was glad that some in the House listened. The House listened in terms of the challenges for the nuclear provisions, in terms of the, placed into service deadlines and the beginning of construction deadlines. However, I don't think it's enough realistically. What I'm hopeful for is that these kind of conversations are really helpful. For example, when John Ketchum, for those of you who were here for that, when he was here earlier, and he was explaining that, all of the above, fine, but let's make sure we sequence it right. So if we really want to push on natural gas, or we really want to push on nuclear, and you can't get a turbine until 2031, and yet FERC, and you've got the two FERC chairmen coming on after me, FERC at the end of last year said we need, by 2030, 128 gigawatts of power, 128 to be added for AI and electrification. And I've heard the other people on this panel or up here saying it's 150. Whatever that number is, it's a lot. So let's not cut out the biggest portion of what has been added to the grid in the past couple of years. So I'm really proud of the fact that last year there was a record amount of clean power added to the grid. There was, if you add in hydroelectric and you add in the Vogtle plant, the nuclear plant, it was over 60 gigawatts of clean power. That's a record amount of solar. And that same number-ish was projected for this year. So if you add 120 gigawatts in 2 years, and some of that is intermittent and some of that is firm, and you have to get to 128 firm by 2030, we were on the trajectory to get there. But if you eliminate the tax credits, and as everybody has been saying, the investors, the developers, the market right now is just frozen. It is frozen. Nobody's doing anything until they get the rules of the road. So all of that is to say, I think that these conversations are really helpful to get everybody to understand what is happening and the timing of it. And so if we're able to sequence it, let's keep these incentives in place until we can get other forms. I mean, I understand the desire to wean off of incentives over the longer haul, but we have this urgent moment. So if the urgent moment and the incentives have propelled energy being added to the grid, let's keep that going because we know the AI, role is happening. And then you can talk about winnowing that down once the other forms of power come on.
The bill is obviously still an uncertain piece of legislation, but we can kind of see the contours of it, and I think I would expect it's going to pass in some form over the next few weeks. What's the best way forward for the Democrats, given that reality? Do you just say, well, we're going to bring it all back in again? Is there something smarter?
Well, I think, honestly, everybody has to be really thoughtful about this, and you can't be demonizing one side or the other. Everybody wants to say, let's reshore manufacturing. I haven't heard anybody say that's a bad idea. We want to get more manufacturing in the United States, especially advanced manufacturing. If you want to do that, what is the best way to do it? Can you build on the incentives that were in the Inflation Reduction Act to make the kinds of products that will make America lead? Those kinds of things I think you can have bipartisan consensus on, and I think Democrats should be saying that. Similarly, adding generation to the grid. I think that there are ways that Democrats can point to being this pro-growth, pro-clean energy party, and pro-resilience, and pro-reliable grid, all of that. If you take all of that renewable power, and you add batteries to it, and you sync it up right, renewables become baseload-like. So let's focus on the battery research and deployment. There's a lot of battery companies that are out there now that are doing 10-hour-plus batteries. NextEra has got a partnership with EOS, for example, to do that. So let's focus on continuing to develop these technologies as Democrats. Let's focus on the incentives that will get us to where we need to be. Let's listen to the importance of making sure we have deficit control, and I think we can get there. And similarly, I think that we can get there somewhat in the provisions in this bill. If they fix the three things that everybody's talking about, the transferability of the credits, the FIAC rigor, which is impossible to work with, and the placed in service timelines, if they fix those three technical fixes, then I think it could be workable.
Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I heard a number of voices up here saying that those, if you can be careful about how you talk about it, these are technical fixes to things that are unworkable, and the business community has asked for this, and they've asked for certainty. So I'm hopeful that there will be willing ears to listen.
You put a lot of emphasis on your time in power on EVs and the future of the EV market. What do you think in terms of what the president is doing with tariffs on China? And do you have some sympathy with the idea of higher tariffs?
Well, Joe Biden put tariffs on EVs as well, and I certainly have sympathy in making sure that we are in the lead on this. However, when you take away the tax incentives for the build out of the batteries for EVs, then you are basically, potentially just saying, China, it's yours. Because China is developing this, and they see our pullback as their opportunity. And we talk about critical minerals, of course, in the batteries. We talk about the battery supply chain. China has big-footed the United States in that. We were starting to get some of that back. The responsible extraction of lithium, of graphite, of all these projects that the Loan Program Office funded to be able to fill in the gaps in the supply chain. The anode, the cathode, the separator material, the electrolyte, all of these businesses coming to America to build up this battery supply chain. If you eliminate the incentives to have these public-private partnerships for that to happen, then you are ceding the territory on EVs, on critical minerals, on national security, in my opinion, to our adversaries. And I'm hopeful that people see the importance of having public-private partnerships in order for these critical industries to succeed in America, because though there is no doubt that there is an industrial strategy in China that is subsidizing what's happening there, and therefore they have a leg up on selling to a global market.
The sort of king of EVs, if I can put it that way, is still Elon Musk, who's a man who's rarely out of the headlines and certainly been on a bit of a journey the last few years, if I can put it that way. Do you see him as a positive force in this conversation?
Well, he certainly has been. I mean, obviously Tesla's been an amazing car, industry product, et cetera. He's obviously been incredible. Obviously, the later part of his journey has been more challenging, we'll say. And I am worried about the tax credits. I know they're not in the House bill, but I also know that if you take away the demand side incentives for people to purchase electric vehicles, and remember these tax credits were pegged to income, so it's not like a bunch of wealthy people get the $7,500 tax credit. But if you take away the demand side, then what you have done is essentially gutted the ability for all of these batteries that had announced they were coming to the United States to be successful. The projections are that taking away those credits will reduce the EV sales by 40%. And that means all of the batteries that we're building out in anticipation of a big push in EVs become stranded assets. And so they're not going to turn on. And that, again, is benefiting our economic adversaries rather than building up this capability in the United States. So my worry is that for Mr. Musk engaging in this fight in a way that is counterproductive will further cement many in Congress's and the president's potentially desire to take away those credits.
Would you like to see the Democrats work more closely with him? Now he seems to have distanced himself a little from the White House.
Well, I think the Democrats would welcome him helping us out politically, but financially, et cetera. But maybe not. I don't know. I'm not running, but I do know people who are, and I'm thinking, but it all depends. Is he good? Is it bad? It's a little hard to know how that comes out. It's not. The story is not over yet, obviously. What time is it?
It's probably changed even
Right.
while we've been speaking. I haven't had my X feed in front of me. Is there a different way that Democrats can talk about this stuff that would resonate more with voters than it did when you were in the administration?
It's such a great question because we all know that climate change is not the highest on people's list, right? But I think that attracting jobs in America and leading the competition in the world and lowering energy costs, I think those are really important things. If you eliminate the robust ability for the build out of say, solar, which is the cheapest form of energy, then you substitute it with a more expensive form of energy, or you don't substitute it fast enough with any form of energy and you see blackouts, et cetera, the ramifications for consumers are very significant. So Democrats talking about cost, keeping costs low by using the cheapest form of energy, and again, I say this as former governor and talking to people who don't want their kids to move away from them in a lot of the Midwestern states. And when they lost factories and people felt like their kids aren't going to stay, they're not going to see their grandkids, The ability for people's kids to have future-facing jobs in an industry that is in global demand with this very high tech, I mean, that's exciting. That's great stuff. And I think Democrats can really talk about that and should be talking about that a lot more.
Do you regret it wasn't talked about more in the 2024
Well, I do,
campaign?
yes, for sure. I was talking about it, but, you know, and here's the other thing. I mean, I think Democrats have to do a better job of speaking to all channels and being fearless about going to places that may not be allies. You know, like, I mean, Pete Buttigieg obviously goes on Fox News a lot, but it's not just the cable network. I mean, the cable shows, you know, there may be 5 million voters or listeners, but in the ecosystem, social media ecosystem, I mean, Joe Rogan has 38 million listeners, you know? So we have to go to places where people are listening, and we didn't do that. And that I really regret. We need to really focus on expanding and being fearless and saying stuff and going places, because once you go, you're not a mystery anymore, and people don't fantasize about what you know, the conspiracies. So, you know, you go and you talk straight to people. I think it's a much better strategy.
Given we have a Republican trifecta right now undoing a lot of the work that you did, you don't sound as pessimistic as I might have expected. Do you still feel optimistic about the future?
I definitely feel optimistic about the future. I'm worried about the timelines. I'm, you know, with the DGA group now, I'm working with private sector entities, and you know, and the DGA group absorbed the Albright-Stonebridge group, so Madeleine Albright's group, and so we have people in 35 different countries. Or I think it's 45 different countries, but a huge listening opportunity on the ground for what's happening globally, as well as what's happening here from a US business point of view. And the reason why I'm optimistic is because people see the opportunity that's out there across the globe. I mean, this clean energy sector is a $28 trillion global opportunity, and businesses want to participate in that. And so even with the tariffs present an opportunity for us to still go after European businesses, South American businesses, to say, if you want to avoid the tariffs, come and locate in the United States. It would be better if they also had access to the tax credits too, so that they could do both development of clean energy projects as well as manufacture of those devices. So it's an opportunity there. For those businesses in the United States who feel like I'm ready to go and want to see an opportunity in other countries, it's a moment, because obviously this is a global issue. And when I went to at the last COP in Baku, this was after the election, and when we go to the COP, you know, we meet with all the energy ministers, and the other energy ministers, you know, I'm so sorry, what happened, so sorry, but don't worry, we got this, is what they said, basically. We got this, we want to lead. You know, in the United States, you've had such a big footprint, you know, perhaps it clouded out their ability to lead. And so, you know, if that's true, and other countries see this as an opportunity, that's great.
There you go. A positive note to end on. The red counter says we're out of time. I could talk all day.
All right.
But thank you so much,
Very good.
ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
so much.
Yeah.